Okay, so this is a video that's going to go over the end of year English exam for the writing. So, if you've already done the reading exam, you'll be pleased to know, if you've seen that video, you'll be pleased to know this is just one document. You don't have to do anything else other than use this one document to answer this exam. Same as the reading, it's 1 hour, and same as the reading, it's 30 marks. But this one's different because whereas in the reading paper we want you to answer all of the questions and you don't choose which ones to do and which ones to leave, you will get a choice here. So you will have a choice of these 3 different types of question. So question 9 will always be what we call a persuasive writing question. I didn't really want pink, but there we go, we'll go with pink. This is a persuasive writing question. Imagine it being like a newspaper article or perhaps a speech where you're trying to get someone to agree with your point of view. This second one is what we call a narrative story. And it's exactly that. It's a story. It tells you in the question, write a story. We want you to create a narrative, which means you have a flow of events and characters and settings, and you create something that we can immerse ourselves into. And the last one is a descriptive piece. Again, it's in the question. And we want you to describe something. Now, when you describe something, we don't want you to just say, it's big, it's blue, it's round. We want you to be a lot more detailed. And it might ask you to describe a place, a person, a time. So each of these is worth 30 marks. They're all worth the same. Let's have a look at the things that you get marked on for this question. So what you get marks for. The first thing you get marks for is the quality of your writing. This means... This means that you need to write in a clear way. If you have a brilliant idea but you don't express it very well, then that's no good to anybody. So we need you to write your ideas in interesting and clearly communicative ways. So use of metaphors, similes, and other techniques to get your idea or point across. I think a lot of books would be very boring if they didn't use these sorts of techniques, because hearing then this happened, then that happened, then the other happened is repetitive and it can easily get boring. Writing in the correct style for each question, because they are all different. You can't answer all of these questions in the same way. There might be one of these questions that we've looked at that you think, actually, that one is the one that I feel more confident on. For me, for instance, I gravitate towards either this question or this question, the descriptive one. And I know I'm not very good at writing narratives. I've never been good at writing stories. So for me, I would avoid this one and focus more on the other 2. Play to your strengths on this. Coherent and clear communication and fluency. What this means is we need your writing to flow. If it doesn't make sense, if you jump all over the place, if you're writing a story and you swap back and forth and left and right all over the place, it's not going to help us to understand your story and follow it. So it needs to be clearly written. And sophisticated vocabulary. We would like to see you use more accurate words for things and use more interesting words that perhaps we don't use in our everyday lives, but that make our writing a lot more interesting and exciting. Second thing that you get marked on, as always, is the accuracy of your writing. So your spag, but also things like your paragraphs, using proper English, and your sentence structures. These are still really important, so don't just think that they don't matter, because they do, okay? Right, the next thing that we need to do is look at each question. So the question 9 is always a persuasive writing question. Now, your writing paper will have a thematic link to your reading paper. So the reading paper, which was all about nannies, this writing paper has got links to the ideas that are behind nannies and the job they do. So here we've got this question. Parents are always too keen to let children be disciplined and brought up by other influences these days. The best influence on a child is a positive parent. Discuss. So here you're going to need to persuade or argue your point of view. You need to have a clear point of view, but also consider other ideas. So if you say, actually, no, the best influence on a child isn't a positive parent, you need to be able to come back at somebody who would say, actually, I disagree. you've got to have a balanced argument and consider both sides. But we do also want you to make a final decision by the end of your writing. Ways that you could make it interesting are to use anecdotes to bring in personal experience. This could be true or imagined, and familiar references as well. Great example was in that nanny piece of writing where she talked about famous nannies such as Mary Poppins and Nanny McPhee. Create an engaging tone through the use of humour and imagery, otherwise it would just be boring. Using Be in a Forest or Forest Fires Happen. Focusing on the ideas behind the statement. This statement isn't really about parents being lazy, it's about what is the best influence on a child. And concluding with a strong statement and opinion for impact. So even though we want you to sort of consider both sides, we want you to make a decision by the end. Because if you end your writing by saying, yeah, there's both good and bad things, that's not telling us anything. That's not giving us your opinion. So if you're doing this one, here is how I would plan it. So get yourself a table. And what you could do here is have agree and disagree with this statement. So agree is the idea that positive parenting is good, and disagree is the idea that positive parenting isn't always the be all and end all. It's not the most necessary thing. Okay, so if we agree, then we would say obviously parents play an important role in a child's life. But also, on the other hand, there are lots of other people and adults who are involved in a child's life as well. So when you do this plan, you want to come up with different ideas that are going to support both sides of the statement and then pick which one you're going to do. And you will want to play these off on one another. So what we need for this is we need lots and lots of connectives, but whereas on the other hand, to show that you're being reflective and you're not just picking one side or the other, you've got to think about both sides. If you are maybe a little bit more opinionated, this might be a good question for you to answer because you might find it easier. If it's the sort of thing that you enjoy doing, then go ahead for it. Next type of question that you'll get is the narrative writing. So this question on this sample is write a story, true or imaginary, called The Family. You can see that link to the family, linking back to the whole nanny idea because nannies work for families. So you need to create a clear structure, exposition, introduction of dilemma, rising tension, climax, falling tension, resolution. Before we go any further, I'm just going to draw a little diagram to show you what I mean about this. Most stories have an arc like this, where if this is the start and this is the end, you can see that the tension rises throughout the story until a point where everything is all happening at once and it gets very, very tense, and that is the climax, and then it all sort of works itself out by the end. This is a useful way to start, but you don't have to follow this perfectly. So you might want to think about interesting ways to jump into your story by using flashbacks or jumping into the action or using a memory, anything like that. You also need to think about which person you use, first person, I, second person we don't need, or third person he or she. Tenses as well, past or present tense, and point of view. If you've got two characters, are you going to do one person's point of view and then the other person's point of view, or just focus on one? And think about how you can relate to that point of view as well. Introducing characters with small but impactful physical details and personality traits. I find it really interesting to think about a character. If I'm reading a book and it tells me that a character is ginger, that's not as useful as knowing that a character has bright orange curly hair and it looks like this and it feels like that, because that creates a more vivid image in my mind. Also, the little details are really important. I remember in a Harry Potter book, there's a detail that's included about Dumbledore having a scar on his knee, which is an exact replica of the London Underground. And that tells us a lot about his character. So think about these little details that you can add in. A combination of reported speech and direct speech. So reported speech is he said, she said, but direct speech is where we want to use the speech marks, and it's where we are writing exactly what they have said. Consider an audience for this story and tailor your language. So think about, who's this story for? Is it for adults? Is it for children? And then writing a whole story, planning your time carefully. So planning this one, you might want to use the diagram that I've done, where you might want to draw little plot points on here and say what happens when, or you might like to do it differently and do a mind map or something like that. But you're going to need to have some form of planning, especially when you are going to have characters and setting. If you are doing a mind map, you might want to break your branches up into characters, setting. So in that way, it could be useful to combine this bit of planning with this bit and do both of them. And then the last type of writing question you'll get is the descriptive writing. Describe a place that you feel you belong in. So this should have something that you can think of. These questions aren't made to, you know, catch you out. You're not going to be asked a question about describe a place in which you won the lottery, or, you know, something that might not have happened. It should be something that you can relate to. You need to use descriptive details and literary techniques. Now, this is the one where it's not good enough to say the balloon was blue. We want to know exactly what shade. What did the balloon look like? What did it remind you of? And go into as much detail as possible. Focusing on small details, expressions and ideas, and expand them as much as possible. So the idea of the balloon, maybe me talking about a balloon is a bigger scene of being in a party, and me focusing on that small detail of a balloon is really useful. I've read writing answers from students before where they wrote about a bus and they described the handrail on the bus and all the different people that touch the handrail, and that was a really interesting detail. Using the 5 senses and making the reader feel like they're in this place. So using the sensory language, describing weather using pathetic fallacy to engage your reader. Pathetic fallacy is when the weather reflects the mood in a story or in a scene. So if it's sunny outside, people are usually happy. If it's stormy and rainy, then people are usually sad or angry. Think of unique and interesting colour descriptions to use. So caramel brown, concrete grey, shamrock green. These colour descriptions have a lot more weight and tell us a lot more about the colour than just saying green, grey or brown. We've got a clearer picture in our minds from that. And then using metaphors and similes to create useful links for readers to imagine the setting in their own head. This is one where you might want to use SOAPMAPS to think of all the different techniques that you're going to want to use. Now with this one, for planning, I would say the best plan would be a mind map. So for thinking, for me, a place where I feel I belong, I might put a library, of course. And then I'm going to think about the details of that library. So it could be things like the doors and the walls, but also what about the lighting? What about the senses and the smells? So I might think about not only the smells, but the sounds. Don't think the tastes, because we don't eat in the library. Other things that you could think about, how is it used? Because then I could describe other things in there. So I could describe people studying, I could describe people reading. And then I've got subjects from both of those things. I could describe the person who's reading or the book that they're reading. Also, we could describe different things that we can see that are just minor details. So we might perhaps think about the pillars, if we're thinking of our school library, or the chairs, or the posters. You know, maybe a poster is coming off the wall and the edges are coming away from the wall and it's sort of curling. These little details are really, really useful in our planning. So that's your writing exam. My suggestion to you would be to pick one of the 3 and then have a go at writing it and see what you've done well and see what you can improve.